The boat does not need to survive. It needs 4 minutes. That is the first thing to understand about Hormuz, not 21 nautical miles on a chart, not a neat corridor on a screen, in a real fight, with civilian traffic packed into the same water, with radar clutter bouncing off hulls, islands, and wave tops. The Strait of Hormuz shrinks to 4 minutes. 4 minutes to notice one small craft breaking out of a fishing cluster. 4 minutes to decide whether it is a fisherman or a missile carrier. 4 minutes to assign a weapon, clear the shot, and kill it before 2 anti-ship missiles leave the rail. That is the real width of the Strait, and that is why the real story is not whether the U.S. Navy can stop Iran from breaking the blockade. The real story is whether the Navy can keep stopping Iran long enough without bleeding the blockade dry. Iran does not need to sink the blockade, it only needs to make the blockade too expensive to hold. That is the whole war in one line by any normal measure. Iran's surface fleet is already broken. The frigates are gone, the corvettes are gone, the conventional Navy no longer looks like a force that should scare a destroyer captain. That is exactly why it is dangerous. A fleet that cannot win a conventional sea battle stops fighting for conventional victory. It starts fighting for cost, it stops trying to survive, it starts trying to make the other side spend. That is what Hormuz rewards. A small IRGC fast attack craft looks absurd next to a destroyer. It is tiny, cheap, and expendable. It can carry 2 anti-ship missiles and sprint across flat water at extreme speed. It is not designed to dominate the sea. It is designed to appear late, move fast, and force a very expensive response inside a very short clock. That is enough because the blockade puts the U.S. Navy in the worst geometry possible. American warships are not sitting in blue water with long warning windows and clean target separation. They are sitting in confined water, surrounded by commercial traffic, forced to watch hundreds of contacts at once while looking for the one small shape that suddenly stops behaving like a civilian. Out in the Pacific, a defender can have time. In Hormuz, time disappears. That is why the source is right to say the real enemy here is not just Iran, it is arithmetic. Iran can attack the blockade on multiple layers at once. Shore-based anti-ship missiles from the coast and the islands. Small submarines hiding in shallow water where sonar gets ugly. Shad drones skimming low enough to merge into clutter. Fast attack boats buried among fishing traffic. A command vessel farther back tying the swarm together. None of these systems has to win by itself. They only have to land inside the same compressed decision window. That is how you attack a stronger Navy in a narrow strait, not by outgunning it, by overwhelming its clock. So how does the Navy answer that with architecture? Not one ship, not one missile, not one radar architecture. The destroyer's own radar is powerful, but power does not defeat geometry. A very small boat low to the water is hard to see at useful range when the sea is crowded. That is why the true eye of the kill web is not on the ship, it is above it. The 2D Hawkeye matters because altitude creates time. It looks down into the corridor and sees far earlier than the destroyer can see for itself. Then the network pushes that picture into the warship fast enough that the ship can shoot based on someone else's eyes before its own radar has fully solved the problem. That is one of the great hidden truths of modern naval war. The ship can kill what it cannot yet properly see because the network saw it first. That is not just technology. That is time manufacturing, and time is everything in Hormuz. Once the target is detected, the next question is even harder. What do you shoot? This is where most people misunderstand the fight. They think the issue is whether the United States has enough firepower to kill swarms of small Iranian boats. Of course it does. The real issue is whether it can kill the right targets with the right weapons at the right cost, night after night, without burning through the blockade's future just to survive its present. That is the weapons ladder. And it may be the most important idea in the whole file. Every expensive missile fired at a cheap target is a strategic mistake, unless there is no other choice. The destroyer-S cells are finite. Its interceptors are finite. The helicopter-S magazine is finite. The deck gun-S ammunition is finite. The question is never only, can this target die? The question is, how cheaply can this target die while still dying in time? That is why Hellfire matters so much. Not because it is glamorous, because it is economical. A Seahawk can carry several of them, one missile, one small boat. If the geometry cooperates, below that sits APKWAS, cheap enough to spend more freely and precise enough to kill a hull at short range. Then come the guns and close, in layers when the contact has survived too long. Only after that should the premium weapons matter. 6 is not for the boat you can erase with a Hellfire. It is for the target that justifies a $4 million answer. The same logic applies upward. Harpoon for what still fits Harpoon. LRASM for what must die through jamming and defenses. Quick sink for blockade runners that can be sunk far more cheaply by underwater blast physics than by prestige missiles. That is not just good tactics. That is campaign survival. The blockade will not be lost because America forgot how to kill. It will be lost if America kills correctly but spends incorrectly. That is why the network matters so much. No human being can manually solve dozens of simultaneous weapon target pairings inside a 4-minute engagement while helicopters, destroyers, fighters, and other services are all working in the same battle space. It has to become a network fight. The Hawkeye sees, Aegis fuses, cooperative engagement capability, shares raw data, NIFC turns separate shooters into one kill web. JDC-2 bridges the seams when the Navy's problem becomes the Air Force. As shot, the ship is no longer just a ship. The helicopter is no longer just a helicopter. The fighter is no longer just a fighter. They become one-timed response. That is what makes a 30-boat problem solvable. But here's the darker truth. Solvable does not mean sustainable. That is the deepest line in the source, and it is the one most people will miss if they only admire the machinery. Iran does not need one breakthrough attack. It needs repetition. If 30 boats come tonight and the kill web erases all 30. That is an American tactical victory. If 30 more come tomorrow night and 30 more the night after that, and every wave forces helicopters to spend missiles, guns to spend ammunition, destroyers to stay loaded and hot, and the wider network to keep burning through inventory, then the campaign becomes a countdown. Not a countdown to collapse, a countdown to depletion. A ship cannot reload VLS cells at sea. A helicopter that has spent its Hellfires is not the same helicopter. A blockade that wins every engagement can still become thinner, more brittle, and more expensive with every success. That is why the Source S final insight is so strong. Iran does not need to sink a destroyer. It needs to make one leave. That is the master axis of the entire story. Make the blockade rotate, make it consume, make it win every night, but pay for every win until the price itself becomes the strategy. That is how a weaker force fights a stronger one in confined water, not by smashing the wall, by making the wall too costly to keep standing. And once you see that, the whole Iranian playbook looks different. The swarm is not a swarm because Iran thinks small boats can beat Aegis in a fair fight. The swarm is a spending mechanism. The drones are a spending mechanism. The submarine threat is a spending mechanism. Even uncertainty is a spending mechanism because the defender must stay ready for the contact that might be hostile. That is what Hormuz has become, a place where American superiority is real, but every proof of that superiority comes with an invoice. And that is where engineering becomes strategy. A blockade is not just a line of ships. It is a political timeline supported by a logistics timeline. If the political objective requires months, but the munitions burn rate makes those months harder with every engagement, then perfect tactical performance no longer guarantees strategic success. You can win every night and still move closer to a point where the bill starts dictating the outcome. That is why cheap kills matter so much. Hellfire matters because it preserves premium inventory. APKWS matters because it lets the Navy spend tens of thousands where it would otherwise risk spending millions. Quicksync matters because a blockade runner that can be destroyed cheaply does not deserve an expensive missile. Sometimes the least glamorous weapon is the one that buys the blockade another week. That is the American genius in this story. Not just more firepower, better firepower economics. The kill web is not only a battle network, it is a spending control machine disguised as a battle network. Its job is not just to win the engagement. Its job is to prevent the Navy from spending future survival to solve present panic. But Iran understands that too, which is why the source is right to reduce the whole contest to arithmetic. The U.S. Navy wins on quality. Iran wants to win on repetition, exchange rates, and exhaustion. The Navy wants to hold the line. Iran wants to make holding the line more expensive every night. That is why the most important question in the whole piece is not can the destroyer kill the boat? Of course it can. The real question is this: how many perfect nights can the blockade afford before perfect stops being sustainable? That is the real suspense in Hormuz. Not whether America is stronger, whether strength can remain economical, not whether the kill web works, whether the kill web can keep working long enough, not whether Iran can win the battle, whether Iran can turn the battle into a bill. And if you want the whole thing compressed into one hard line, it is this: Iran does not need to break the blockade. It only needs to make the blockade cost more than it can keep paying.